She would like us to just keep throwing $4 or $5 million into that cesspool every year.
What's
people at work?
Yeah, I still don't. Let me ask you, because I'm asking everybody. What's the problem with filling out a form and registering your gun? Is this an argument about the principle of the thing, or what?
It's the principle and of your freedoms.
Your freedom.
Well, they keep picking away at our freedoms. Freedom. Yeah, freedom to buy a gun. We have to. You can buy a car. Well, if you don't want to drive it on the road,
yeah, I know. I just heard that argument. Yeah, but if you have an FAC, you can buy any gun you want that's legal to buy.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, then what's the matter?
Why do I have to give a shopping list away to criminals who will or can go in and break into that registry? It's already been compromised more than once, and get a perfect shopping list of whatever kind of a gun they want, where it is. Address, telephone number, how many guns, and everything is in there.
All right, Dennis, thank you very much for that. I mean, I've heard this concern before. What's the counter-argument? I'm sure it can happen. Has it happened in the past? Well, Greg says yes.
3 weeks ago, the Minister of Public Safety filed a complaint with the Privacy Commissioner of Canada about the RCMP, his own police force, and the Canadian Firearms Center handing over the data on firearms owners in this country to ECOS polling, to do a poll on how satisfied they were with the firearm system. So, But
that was the licensing information, Greg.
With all due respect, it was not, Wendy.
What do you mean the licensing?
It was the information about who owns guns. It wasn't the information
about the guns. With all due respect, that's not quite correct. It was registration information that was handed over to ECOS polling. And quite frankly, I have the data right here. So far, there have been 1,495 breaches of the system between 1995 and 2003. 427 were confirmed and investigated by the RCMP.
And where does that come from?
That comes from the access to information request in 2003.
Filed by whom?
Filed by the media.
Okay. All right. Is there any counter? I mean, we're being inundated, us mere mortals out there, either with guns or without guns, with all kinds of conflicting facts and figures on both sides of the argument. I don't know how we're supposed to pick a side to believe.
I think at the end of the day, you consider the source. When you have the major police organizations, and I should point out, going back to one of the callers, the president of CACP in 2004 was actually Edgar MacLeod from Cape Breton, a rural area, lots of hunters. And he was one of the strongest proponents of the licensing and registration system.
Okay, but neither side is ever going to win this argument about who's opposed and police forces and who isn't opposed.
But what's really important, Dale, is in rural communities, there's this notion guns are only a problem in the big cities. In fact, the rates of gun death are higher in rural communities because domestic violence and suicide with guns are much higher in those
Although
areas.
Other people seem to be painting this as a political battle, there seems to be no doubt about that, as a fight between those who live in urban areas and those who live in rural areas.
But in fact, teenagers and women are more at risk in rural areas.
Okay, well, let me hear from Greg on that.
Well, first of all,
that the kind of battle it is?
No, it's not. I mean, we have as many members in urban areas as we do in rural areas. This is not a rural-urban split issue. You know, Wendy.
But aren't there more hunters in rural areas than there are in the city of Toronto, for example?
Not necessarily. They don't hunt in the city of Toronto, but they certainly live in the city of Toronto. Yeah. I mean, the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters has thousands of members who live in the GTA, who live in Mississauga, who live in Brampton, who live in Toronto. They hunt. They are legal, law-abiding, responsible firearms owners. They don't hunt in the city, quite clearly.
Of course.
But it's not just rural residents who are opposed to this system.
Thought from you before I go back to the phone.
The rates of gun ownership in urban areas are much lower than in rural areas.
Long gun ownership, is that what you're talking about?
Any guns.
Yeah.
And where you have more guns, you have more opposition to gun control, but where you have more guns, you have higher rates of death and injury. And that's as plain as
What about that statistic?
No, that's baloney. Actually, the Toronto Star a couple of years ago published a
How do you know what she's saying is baloney?
Because, I'll tell you, the Toronto Star published a map a couple of years ago that showed where all the gun owners in Toronto were concentrated, not by name and person and by house, but in general. This map showed that, for instance, in the Jane Finch corridor, which is infamous in Toronto for the number of drive-by shootings, gang-related shootings and whatnot, there were no firearms owners there. So,
not registered legally, no, of course not.
That's exactly the point.
All right, all right.
But it's the rate of gun ownership. The Yukon, for example, where there's lots of opposition to gun control, has 3 times the rate of gun death that the average Canadian place does. Ontario's the lowest because we have the lowest rate of gun ownership in the country. And in northern Ontario, the rates of gun death are higher, about twice the provincial average. In rural communities, the rate per 100,000 is much higher. You're more likely to find a home with a gun.
Let me see if I can wedge another call or two in, okay,
Sure.
before we have to go. Here's David calling from Nova Scotia. David, what do you think? Does Canada need a long gun registry? David, go ahead, please.
No, I don't think that they need a long gun registry. They could keep the handgun registry that they've had since the 30s. However, I think that if the people that live in Montreal and Toronto and Vancouver in these cities want to have gun laws for their city streets that they have so much crime on, let them have it and leave the rural people and the farmers like myself alone. These people don't deal with the same things that we deal with on a daily basis on our farms. In Cape Breton right now, that lady was torn apart by 2 coyotes.
Yeah.
On my farm, I have coyotes crossing my farm nearly on a daily basis, and I deal with a lot different things than that Wendy lady does.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is, they should split the vote. Let the cities look after themselves. Let the rural communities look after the rural communities. And even give the people a vote once in a while instead of having these lobby groups lobby all the time for their little pet projects.
Okay, David, thank you. Thank you very much. I guess David is suggesting a 2-tier gun registry.
Yeah.
I guess that wouldn't work too well, would it?
Well, no,
I don't know.
I can see that would be difficult because where do you draw the boundaries on that one?
Where is truly country and where is truly city?
And then you end up with the patchwork in the U.S. where, you know, one town can ban guns and they come in from the next town.
I think that's something Wendy and I can actually both agree on.
Are you actually...
Yeah.
We're actually agreeing that you either
this?
have it or you don't, but you can't bring in a 2-tier level one like that. It's just not going to work.
What is your estimation of what's going to happen as this bill goes to committee? Let me hear from you, Wendy, and then I'll go to Greg.
Really don't know. I mean, I think that, quite honestly, the vote was partly a function of people not paying attention. I think readers of the Globe and Mail and La Presse woke up after the vote to find out the bill was
a lot of
before
people did,
Parliament.
don't you think?
People were very surprised. I think a lot of the proponents of gun control have been silent, and I'm pretty confident, just based on what we've seen the last few days. It's not just the police, it's public health, it's the emergency physicians, the women's groups are going to be really clear about what's at stake and why it's important.
Greg, what do you think? Well, what's going to happen as this bill goes to committee?
Well, like Wendy, I don't know. Quite clearly, the debate, the legislative debate over this is a long way from being done. I mean, I'll be quite honest. I'm encouraged by the result of the vote in Parliament, but I'm not naive enough to believe that once the bill goes to committee and there are public hearings, that there won't be a real dogfight on this bill in committee, and I expect it to be.
Will this be what you might refer to as a good debate, or is this kind of a, I don't know, a harmful debate somehow?
I think it'll be
is this the kind of argument we want to have in this country?
Well, you know, this is a very intrinsic argument that I think needs to be had. It hasn't been had yet around this particular issue before. It's going to crystallize around Bill C-391, Ms. Hoeppner's bill, and we'll see where that debate goes. But it's not, you know, I don't think either side right now could suggest that this debate is over.
No, of course not.
We had the debate in '77, we had the debate in '91, we had the debate in '95, we had the debate before the Supreme Court of Canada. We're having the debate again. I don't think it's a new debate, and frankly, Dale, as you pointed out, I don't think the sides, I think the lines are drawn in the sand, and it's really going to be a question of where Canadians stand.
We are totally out of time. Could have easily used an extra hour or two tonight, but sorry, just can't do that. We'll see you next week. Same time, same place. Have a good week.
CPAC is panels.